This podcast is brought to you by Most Valuable Podcasts, leading the league in podcasting entertainment.
What's up? Real MVPs, Ricky Widmer here, and I am solo this week for the Onside kick. Sean giving him the week off after helping me out last week, finishing our NFL season previews for you guys. He'll be back next week to help me with our NFL hold us to them predictions. I also have a little bit of a bittersweet announcement. After next week, we are discontinuing. We're kind of taking a little bit of a sidestep here at Most Valuable Podcast. We've had the Onside Kick has been one of our flagship shows for about what now? It was the first one we started in 2012. So that'd be about 7 years that we've been doing the Onside Kick in some form. It hasn't been this exact form. This exact form is maybe about 4 years old here at MVP, but it's what started our kind of, what should I say, love for wanting to do this full-time and wanting to actually try to make this full-time. I should say that since we're not full-time, but actually wanting to make this full-time. After next week, we're taking a sidestep where we're discontinuing the Onside Kick. Still going to have some football videos. I'll bring you those as big stories come up that we have to talk about and doing predictions and stuff. But we're going to come out with another podcast after next week, which from this point is 2 weeks away. So I talked to Sean and Dave. We're going to have that be a surprise in 2 weeks. Come back to the channel. We are going to have a brand new podcast debuting that is going to take the spot of the Onside Kick. Wanted to start off with that bittersweet news to let everyone know a little bit in advance, but I got a jam-packed show for you guys. Going to have two patrons on the show today, Matt and Pat, both calling in, both talking about quarterbacks. Pat's going to be talking about NFC quarterbacks. Matt is going to be talking about Hall of Fame quarterbacks with me, but we're going to start off the show with a little Ezekiel Elliott. And before I get into everything, make sure to support us at patreon.com/mostvaluablepodcast. That's how we get out of this studio that we're currently in and get a studio of our own. This is not our studio. It's one that we are blessed to be able to use. We get a studio of our own through our supporters at patreon.com/mostvaluablepodcast. That link is down below. But let's start with this Ezekiel Elliott kind of news, because it's not, I say news, but it's not news that we get a running back each and every year that's not happy with his contract, that wants a new contract from their existing team. And Ezekiel Elliott is not the first ever. He's not even the first this year, as Melvin Gordon has also said, hey, I'm going to hold out. I ain't coming in. I'm going to be fine holding out until I get a new contract, or you can trade me. Zeke hasn't gone that far. He hasn't gone the trade me route, but Zeke has made it clear he wants a brand new contract. And first off, I just want to set everything straight of what Zeke's contract is. So I'm looking at Spot Rack here. He's in the fourth of his 5-year deal. So he's got this year, next year, then he becomes an unrestricted free agent. So the Cowboys have to lock him down soon, or do they have to lock him down sooner rather than later? We're going to get into that, but basically his contract's coming up to an end. So he's looking for money, and my mind kind of goes a million different ways with this, but let's start with asking the question, has Ezekiel Elliott played his last game in a Cowboy uniform? Part of me wants to say no. That's my first gut reaction, is no, because how I think this is going to play out is, I think right now we're in a little chess match between Jerry Jones and the front office, Ezekiel Elliott and his camp. And right now they're just waiting for who is going to be the one to blink first. Is it going to be Zeke? Is it going to be Jerry Jones? Who's going to do it? And if I'm Ezekiel Elliott, I know my worth. I know that 2 years ago, I was suspended, and up before that suspension, we were 5-3. When I was gone, we were 3-3, and then I came back, and we ended up, I think they ended up being 9-7 that year. So if we do the math, 5-3, and then when they would go to 8-6, and then they were 1-1 when he came back, if that math is correct. But they were chugging when he was starting that year off. And there's a part of me that's like, okay, Zeke knows his worth. He also plays the running back position, which is one of the most demanding positions in football, because once you get to that age of 30, if you hadn't got your money before then, odds are you're not going to be able to get your money when it comes to just age, because of the wear and tear on a body that we expect from our running backs. And Zeke is a guy that this Cowboy team needs to rely on week in and week out. I'm just going to pull up his stats really quick just to see his carries per year since he's been in the league. And it has been, so rookie year, he had 322 touches in 15 games. Then in 10 games in 2017, that was the suspension year, he had 242. Let me pull out, I'm going to pull out a calculator really quick just to see what he would have been on pace for. So let's see, 242 divided by 10. And then that's what, 24. If I times that by a full 16 game season, he was on pace for 387 carries that year. And then last year through 15 games, he had 304. So we can say comfortably that Zeke is a 300 touch guy, where he's going to get 300 touches per season each and every year. So that means as a team, you're relying on him a lot. And some may say, hey, if you rely on him a lot, go ahead and pay him because you still need him. You don't want him to walk. But the Cowboys are kind of in a tricky situation, because not only do they have to give Zeke his money after next year being his contract year, they currently have 3 players this year that they have to pay. Dak Prescott being one of them. Braylon Jones being one of them. Jalen Smith being the third. And for me, I think this is a very tricky situation that the Cowboys are kind of finding themselves in with Zeke, because yes, you rely on Zeke a lot. Yes, your run game is decimated. Yeah, I'm going to use the word decimated without Ezekiel Elliott out there. But at the same time, what's your team going to be better at? If you re-sign, let's say you re-sign just 2 of the 3 guys. Let's say you get Dak and Jalen Smith, and you lock those guys up. Jalen Smith is the only one that's unique. I believe he's the one that's the RFA. Jones and Prescott, unrestricted. Jalen Smith, I believe, is a restricted free agent, so Cowboys have a little bit of wiggle room with that. But let's say they just get Smith and Prescott. Do you think the Cowboys would win more games? And I'm asking you now. I'm not answering this question because I really don't know. Like, I have a thought, but I don't really know the true answer. That's why I'm asking you. So, do you think the Cowboys would win more games if they re-signed Dak and Jalen Smith, or if they lost out on all 3 of those guys, or only got one of those, probably Dak, but loses Jalen Smith, loses Braylon Jones, to make sure that Zeke got his money? The answer for me is you got to get these 3 guys their money now so that they don't hit free agency and then worry about Zeke next year when it's his contract year. And that kind of fits the line of the Cowboy front office. As I'm looking here on CBSSports.com, they have an article with a quote from Cowboys COO Stephen Jones. And he said, and I quote, "Well, I mean, we've got it budgeted that we're going to pay Zeke a significant contract at some point. He's right there at the top with the best in the business, if not the best. We saw what Gurley got paid, and that's probably where it starts. And we'll go from there," end quote. And I kind of almost think, because each side is thinking a little differently. The Cowboys are thinking of it as I just said. They're thinking, okay, we got these three guys we have to pay, and we've got to get them covered before we will get you covered. Where Zeke is looking at it from a completely different way, a completely different aspect, where he's kind of saying, hey, I want to get my money now because, one, with the workload that I'm going under, if I have one injury this year, next year, hell, look at it. AJ Green, injured in practice. Corey Coleman tore his ACL in practice. Like, I could come to training camp, I could tear my ACL, and then you don't want to pay me that money because now I'm coming off of an ACL injury, and then I'm going into my contract year with that, and it could ruin everything. So, like, from the Zeke standpoint, I understand where he's coming from. He wants to get paid. He doesn't want to get hurt. He knows the workload that they put him through. He knows that, I mean, with age and Zeke, it's not really a huge thing because, I mean, even if he played out the next 2 years of his contract or sat out the next 2 years of his contract, he's 26 by the time he becomes an unrestricted free agent. So someone's going to give him money at 26. It really comes down to that workload. And it's like, hey, I know what I'm worth. I'm not going to go out there and play for anything less, which comes to the issue of where we're at right now. Zeke holding out. Apparently he's in Cabo, training while he's holding out from the Cowboys. Other articles have said that there's Jerry Jones running his mouth about, and this is the part I don't like when it comes to Jerry Jones, obviously. He told CBS 11, the point there is you don't have to have a rushing champion to win a Super Bowl. But Emmett was the first one to do it, because they brought up how this isn't the first time the Cowboys have had to deal with this. Emmitt Smith also did the same thing. They lost the first two games. They paid Emmett. They went on to win the Super Bowl. And I get what you're trying to do here, Jerry. Like, I get it. You're trying to say that we don't need Zeke to win the championship, but it's quotes like this that could end up hurting the Cowboys at the end of the day, because you don't know how that is going to land. Like, Zeke could see that and go, well, fuck you too. And there you go. You just killed negotiations. Like, that's why I don't like that kind of a statement from Jerry Jones, because the goal for the Cowboys is to sign the three guys they need this year, or the three young guys this year, and then get Zeke next year. The question is Zeke going to be okay with that? Because I don't know if Zeke is thinking about this, but it's just something that plopped into my mind of, you look at it, Dak gets his money, Braylon Jones gets his money, then you've got Jalen Smith gets his money. Is there going to be enough money for me to get what I want? Because COO of the Cowboys put it out. It's going to start at that Todd Gurley level. And if you look at running backs, Todd Gurley, his guaranteed amount at signing, $21.9 million of a $57.5 million contract for 4 years. You look at Le'Veon. Le'Veon sat out a full year. He was $52.5 million over 4 years. You look at guys like David Johnson, who was one of the first that we saw. 39 over 3, but then since then, LaShawn McCoy has cashed in. It went 40. Then you saw Devonta Freeman in 2017 got his $41 million over 5 years from the Atlanta Falcons. So when it comes to Zeke and playing and how long is this holdout going to last, I think that he will not be in training camp. I don't think we see Zeke for a single preseason game. I don't think so. I think that this holdout goes most, if not all, of the offseason. The question for me is, do the Cowboys let it hit the regular season? And I say, do they let it hit the regular season? Because I necessarily don't think Zeke is going to blink. I don't think this is going to be something where it gets to the season, Zeke goes, well, shit, I got to play. And then they go ahead and, like, he goes ahead, I should say, and plays. Where I see this kind of playing out, and I'm pulling up the Cowboys schedule right now to get a laydown of it, is, to me, one of two things is going to happen. The first one, and this is the one that I think I'd say about 75% chance this one happens, where he doesn't play the preseason. He's not in training camp, vice versa, not in training camp, not in preseason. And then the regular season gets here, and there's no new contract. Jerry Jones is staying strong. He's not going to give Zeke a contract. So then Zeke comes up and he goes, okay, I'm not playing. And he doesn't play against the Giants. And then he goes, okay, I ain't playing against the Redskins. And he doesn't play against the Redskins. And there's a chance in my mind, I know, that the Giant one is iffy. But let's say 2-3 games he misses. Because realistically how things will play out is the Giants, that one's going to be tough for the Giants to win, even with Ezekiel's Cowboys, because Golden Tate's not going to be playing. Sterling Shepard, we don't know how he's going to come back from the little injury he's had in training camp. Hopefully he's there and fine for week 1. And then you got Corey Coleman, torn ACL. Cowboys last year without Golden Tate and without Corey Coleman split with the Cowboys. So, like, I could see the Giants coming in and getting a win week 1, playing the Cowboys tough. But even if they don't do it, it goes to 3 weeks. If they do win against the Cowboys, it's 2. So if they lose to the Giants, then I could see them going into Washington and getting beat by Washington and being 0-2 against the division overall. And the same thing happening that happened with Emmitt Smith of like, well, you know what? Screw it. Here's your money. We'll pay you. Can you get back out on the field, please? We need you to win some games. And then everything chugs along as usual. Or the slight variation, that's option A. Option B to this is that if they win against New York and then lose against Washington, lose against Miami, then before New Orleans, Green Bay, New York, Philly, I could then also see Jerry Jones going, okay, 1-3, here's your money. Go ahead. We need you. We can't beat the Saints. Or if they even, the stupidest thing, I'm glad I'm not in the Cowboys' shoes because I don't know what I would do. Because if you lock down Zeke now, that kind of cripples you when it comes into this free agency. I know they drafted guys in the draft to come in, but none of them to me are anything that's going to be as special as Zeke. Dak Prescott, got lucky with. I know in the draft videos I said he'd be a good fit with the Cowboys. No one expected Dak coming out of college to be what he is right now. So, for me, I look at that and go, do you put your chips on Zeke, sign Zeke, sign Dak, and then possibly lose out on Braylon Jones and Jalen Smith? Or do you say we're going to ride or die with Zeke, we'll get Jones, we'll get Smith. If we don't get Prescott, then we're off. And I know Cowboy fans are like, Ricky, you're stupid. There's no way we're not re-signing Prescott. And part of me goes, yeah, you're right. That's why I kind of like, I want to believe that Zeke will play this year. That's why I said 75-25. But I wouldn't be surprised if he goes ahead and he sits out this whole season. Because I think, here's what's running through my head. If anyone is going to blink in this situation, it's going to be the Cowboys. Because Zeke knows his value. He knows what he's worth. He knows that this team is a worse off team without him than they are with him. So in my view of this, Zeke has all the power. Because the way Zeke sees it is, hey, I'll sit out. We'll miss the playoffs. And then you'll come running. You'll come backing up that Brinks truck to give me money. And if I'm the Cowboys, it's kind of, which pill do you want to swallow? Do you want to swallow the let's get Zeke locked down now and then worry about the other three? Or have him hold out an entire year? Because I think that if he does not get an extension, we will not see Zeke this entire year. Then at that point, that makes negotiations very interesting heading into next year. Because you got an offseason of the three guys you got to get locked down, the young guys you got to get locked down. And then you got Zeke, who's still probably unhappy at that point because he's probably not, in his mind, he's not seen as a priority by you. So that might tender the relationship a bit. But to finally put a kibosh on this kind of me getting my thoughts and just kind of throwing my thoughts out and kind of talking through everything, if I had to definitively answer the question, is this the last, will we ever see Zeke play another game for the Cowboys, or has Zeke played his last game for the Cowboys? I'm going to say no. He will be suiting up for the Cowboys again because I think that the Cowboys start either 0-2 or 1-3, or God forbid they let it go 4 and they go 1-4 in their first 4, or 1-3 in their first 4 games. There's going to be a point, 0-2, 1-3, 1-4, that Jerry Jones says, screw it. Winning is more important. We got to get this done. And they give Zeke their money. That is what I think will happen. He will sit out into the regular season, miss about maybe a quarter at most, the first 4 games at most, probably 2 games, and then get that contract extension. But then there's that little 25% of me that says, I don't know if he is not a Cowboy ever again. But there's a part of me that's like, I could see him sitting out the whole year. I could see both sides not wanting to blink. But that's what I think. I'm going to put my chips on. He holds out into the regular season, misses 2, maybe 3, maybe 4 games, and then gets a contract from Jerry Jones and the Cowboys front office. I want to hear from you guys, though. Let us know what you guys think down below. What do you think of the whole Zeke situation? Do you side with Zeke? Do you side with the Cowboys? If you were the Cowboys office, how would you manage it? And Cowboy fans, what are you thinking? Does Zeke play this year? Does he hold out a couple of games? Is he starting week 1? Is he gone the whole year? Let us know what you guys think down below. But let's move on into our next discussion. And The one disclaimer I'm going to throw out there for you guys watching and listening at home, it's really, if you're on podcast services, you have no worry. But if you're on YouTube, there may be a point where the camera just cuts off and decides to not record me anymore. Had a little battery issue, hoping it lasts through the whole segment. If not, I will fade out. You'll see me back when Pat comes on for segment numero tres. But I am joined by one of our patrons, patreon.com/mostvaluablepodcast, Matt, calling in. I told you before we hit the record button, Matt, I feel like I haven't talked to you in ages.
Yeah, it's been a while. It's been a busy summer, so I haven't been able to make it on too often, but happy to be able to today.
Well, I'm glad to have you on for this one because you've got a really, really interesting discussion. I love how both you and Pat came up with similar discussions, being quarterbacks, on the same exact episode. As me and him are going to look at the NFC North quarterbacks and who's got the most pressure. You kind of want to dive into which quarterbacks, so active quarterbacks right now, are going to be Hall of Famers or could be Hall of Fame quarterbacks, like what's their status. And how we're going to do this is Matt's got his three categories. He's got guys that are for sure locks. He's got guys that are on the fence. And then you've got guys that it's kind of a little bit too early to tell. So we're going to go through each kind of category. The first one might be the lightest one because it might be like, yeah, of course, those guys are Hall of Fame quarterbacks. But then we're really going to get into the nitty-gritty about some of these guys. So, Matt, I'm going to have you read us off your first group. So the guys that you think are for sure locks for Hall of Fame that are active quarterbacks right now.
All right, so for the locks, and yeah, again, this is active quarterbacks. I mean, there are guys that will be Hall of Famers that have retired in the past few years. Peyton Manning comes to mind. But as far as active quarterbacks that I consider locks, the first one is my favorite player. Go figure, Drew Brees. I don't think there's any debate. He's statistically in the top 3 or 2 in touchdowns, yards, and completion percentage. Then of course Tom Brady's in there. He's got the statistics and the rings to back it up. There's no debate there. Call him assistant quarterback if you will. I will too, but he's still too darn good. Then third, I've got Big Ben Roethlisberger. I think he's got the track record, the longevity, the statistics to back it up, and he's got a Super Bowl ring. And then finally, I guess maybe this one some people might argue, but I think he's there, Aaron Rodgers. Unless something were to happen and his career ended, I still think he might have the track record and the statistics to be considered a lock. So he's my fourth one to round that out.
Aaron Rodgers is the interesting one. And, that's one where it's like, I'm hearing you call him. It's like, okay, Drew Brees has a Super Bowl, could get another one this year. Really, his career was kind of resurrected overnight, I want to say, because the injury in San Diego, and then resurrects himself with the Saints. Tom Brady's like the Michael Jordan of football, where it's like, if Michael Jordan's in the Hall of Fame for basketball, there's no way Tom Brady's going to be out of the Hall of Fame. Aaron Rodgers is the interesting one to me because am I saying he's not a Hall of Fame quarterback? No. But I almost have to say this, and I'll get your thought. This is the thing I'll ask you about this kind of portion of your Hall of Fame quarterbacks. Is I almost look at it where it's like, okay, if Brett Favre is a Hall of Famer, then Aaron Rodgers should also be in that discussion because statistically he's there. I know he's not the Iron Man that Brett Favre was. Injuries have kind of been, 9 games in 2013. He only played 7 games in 2017. But career-wise, wins a Super Bowl, hasn't really done much, or has gone to playoffs but hasn't won any other Super Bowls. Do you think that alone is a strong enough argument for Aaron Rodgers, or if there's even an argument to keep him out of the Hall of Fame because he's only got one Super Bowl?
I don't, and I think that's the kind of maybe a common theme in the sense of if you're talking kind of maybe the super elite guys, at least of recent, I think, at least statistically, I think that includes Peyton Manning, Tom Brady, and Drew Brees are up there just because they're pretty much top 5 in every category you can think of as for a quarterback. And the big difference, obviously, then is Brady has 6 rings and Manning and Brees have 2 or less. But I think there's no statistic to accurately capture this, but you have to consider the teams they're on. Like, Peyton Manning, the Colts were nothing without him. They proved that the year he was out with a neck injury. And sorry to keep bringing him in because I know he's not an active quarterback. But Drew Brees even, like, I think I saw something at one point that when he's had an average defense or better, so not even a good defense, an average defense or better, he's made the playoffs every year. He's even had some below average defensive teams that he's dragged to the playoffs. And I think the same kind of goes in Rodgers' case. I don't think, honestly, I mean, obviously he's had Jordy Nelson, kind of Devontae Adams put around him, but besides that, he's never had a super great defense to support him. He's never had a running game. He's having to run around for his life half the time, because of his line. Like, I think you have to consider how much these guys elevate their teams because of just how good they are, and I think that's the case for him, as much as I hate him.
Yeah, and I mean, the other thing that I look into is the great thing about this discussion is that, so Aaron Rodgers at 35, how's the rest of his kind of career going to play out? And that's a lot of these, since they're still active guys, you look at Brett Favre, and I pulled up his stats while you were answering my question, and if you look at it, almost 72,000 career yards, over 500 touchdowns, whereas you look at Aaron Rodgers, and so far through, he's had, Brett Favre played to 41, so 6 more seasons on Aaron? Aaron's at almost 43,338. So it really comes to a question, one, do you think stat-wise Aaron Rodgers could catch him, which I think he could, especially let's see what Matt LaFleur's offense is going to do. But also, Brett Favre had 11 Pro Bowls, 3 MVPs, and Aaron Rodgers has 7 and 2 MVPs. So if he gets out of those 6 years, if we get 4 Pro Bowl years out of him and we get 1 MVP-like season, I think he's got it in it to where Aaron Rodgers, it really is going to tell with his Hall of Fame status, what does he do from this point on? What does he do with his, let's say he has 6 years left. Let's say he has 5 years left. What does he do in those last 5 to 6 years that defines him as a Hall of Fame quarterback? Because I think that for most of his career, it's been Tom Brady and Aaron Rodgers. Like, I remember we had a discussion on this podcast, who's the best quarterback in the NFL, Aaron Rodgers or Tom Brady? Let's get into your second group, though. Who are the guys in your mind that are kind of on the fence?
All right. Well, yeah, this is where it gets a little interesting. So the first guy is Eli Manning. I think he's debatable just because of maybe the perception and how he's played recently. He has 2 Super Bowl rings, but, I guess when I think of him, I don't think superstar per se, but he's an interesting case. I've got Matt Ryan on there as well. Strong statistics, but not the playoff maybe backing to help him in that case. I have Phillip Rivers, and then I've got kind of the interesting cases because they're more mobile quarterbacks in Russell Wilson and Cam Newton. Those are the guys I have that I think you can make an argument one way or another, yes or no. So what are your thoughts?
I'll ask you this. Either either out of this group who's one, or if you see multiple, but let's do it this way. Who's one of these guys that you personally see as like, you know what, I know he's in this category, but I think end of the career, he's going to be a Hall of Famer? Who's that guy out of this group?
I think it has to be Eli because of the ring.
Mm-hmm.
I think, he's got something that the rest of this group doesn't. I guess, well, obviously Russell does. But he's got that, and then he's top 10 statistically in passing yards for his career, and then top 10 in passing touchdowns as well. So it's not like he's not up there statistically as well. I'm sure he's up there statistically in interceptions. I didn't look at that, but so was Brett Favre. So.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I mean, the whole interception thing, like, I don't think, when it comes to Hall of Fame, I don't think interceptions are a huge, like, negative. Really, they're going to look for how many yards did you throw for, how many touchdowns do you have, and then they're going to look for the big ones, MVPs, Pro Bowls, Super Bowl championships. For Brett Favre, another thing that, like, played into him since I brought him up with Aaron Rodgers is it's hard to ignore his Iron Man streak that he had also of consecutive games played and not being injured. The thing that I want to throw out there with Eli and kind of bring it to, because one of the guys that you mentioned in your for sure locks that you were like, oh, he's a for sure lock. I was kind of like, okay, I could see it. But there was a part of me that's like, I don't know. I want to say no. So I'm gonna blind resume you here, Matt. I'm gonna give you two quarterbacks.
Perfect.
I want you to tell me if, first off, which one you would pick if you had to pick between. We'll do that. If you had to pick for Hall of Fame and you had to pick between these two, who are you picking? And here is quarterback A. I'm going to give you yards, touchdowns, and then their yards, touchdowns, and any accliments. Do you want anything else besides those?
Okay.
So, quarterback 1 threw for 56,194 yards and 363 touchdowns. He's got 6 Pro Bowls, and he's a 2-time Super Bowl champion. Whereas quarterback B has thrown for 55,981 yards, so he has about 1,000 yards less, and has thrown for 360 touchdowns, so right around the same mark touchdown-wise. And he's got the same amount of Super Bowls, 2 of them, but he's got 2 less Pro Bowls. He's got 4 compared to 6 of the other. Who are you taking for Hall of Fame, A or B?
If I'm picking one, I think I'm picking A, not by a whole lot, but it looks like he's got the edge and very slightly in those categories. So I guess going A.
So, do you know off the top of your head who you might have picked from your first group?
I think it's Ben Roethlisberger.
It is. So quarterback A was Ben Roethlisberger. Quarterback B was Eli Manning. And the point that I'm making by doing this is if you're out there and you are like, okay, Big Ben is probably a lock for quarterback for Hall of Fame, Eli Manning is 1,000 yards off when it comes to his passing yards. He's 3 touchdowns off in the touchdown race. They both have the same amount of Super Bowl championships. The only thing that Big Ben has on him, he's got 2 more Pro Bowls than Eli Manning. The only thing that is going to, in my mind, hurt Eli Manning is if you're sitting there going, okay, if he's got to make up another Pro Bowl, where is that going to come? Because he's already 37. He might be pushed out the door this year in New York. I'll ask you, Pat, if it's on the edge and it's so close with him being so close to Big Ben. Do you think he'll have time to have another season somewhere else or in New York to do what he needs to do to get into the Hall of Fame?
I think even if New York pushes him out, if he can show to another team that he still has something in him, I got to think another team is at least willing to take a chance on him.
Mm-hmm.
So I think he will get that opportunity. But now that you point all that out and you do that compare, I think that's a good thing to do. I would say that I don't know that he needs to be honest. I think that's close enough to Big Ben that if I'm saying he's in, that Eli, it's hard to say that he wouldn't be in. The only thing I guess I will add is you talked about pretty much the same statistical categories I would when evaluating Hall of Fame performance, but the only other one I did look at was completion percentage.
Mm-hmm.
And when it comes to that, Ben is top 10. He's at 10 completion percentage in overall NFL career, and Eli is not. I don't know where he's at, but he's not in the top 20. So it's just that's just one other thing to look at. But that's also the thing when you're looking at that. You can make so many arguments and look at so many different things to make your argument. But that's where the discussion gets kind of fun.
So the one that I kind of want to go into, and this is one that Sean threw out when I told him we were going to be talking about this, is his first one was like, ooh, Phillip Rivers. And the interesting thing about Rivers, when you look at him, is when you look at his stats, he's got he's there in yards, even though being 37, he's there in yards. He's right around that 55,000 mark for his career. He's got the 374 touchdowns, similar, a little more than Big Ben and even Eli. The thing where he falters is, yes, he's got 8 Pro Bowls, but no MVP for Phillip Rivers, no Super Bowl championship for Phillip Rivers. And I kind of look at it, like, I look at the guys who are in the Hall of Fame, and the one that has just one Super Bowl that's in, you look at Kurt Warner. He played how many years? He was 1998 to 2009. So, and he started late in his career. He started at like 27. So he had like an 11-year career, had 4 less Pro Bowls than Phillip Rivers, had half the amount of Pro Bowls, but was a 2-time MVP and a Super Bowl champ. Then the other two that I was looking at, Warren Moon, he's had 1 more Pro Bowl than Phillip Rivers. He's no Super Bowl, no MVPs. When you look at his stats, he's got less yards over his career. Yet again, started playing when he was 28, played to 44. Has less yards at about 49,000. Has less touchdowns at about 291. And then there's everyone's favorite quarterbacks who haven't won a Super Bowl, Dan Marino. Yes, he's got the MVP. He's got 1 more Pro Bowl than Phillip Rivers. And when it comes to yardage, he beats out Rivers in yardage. He beats out Rivers in touchdowns, 420. So the question I'm going to ask you at Phillip Rivers, Matt, is do you see him, does he have to have an MVP-like season? Does he have to win a Super Bowl with the Chargers? Or is it just, hey, if you're going to play, let's say, 3 more years, really play solid years, rack up maybe another 2 Pro Bowls, and he can be put into the Hall of Fame maybe in that Warren Moon category of, hey, I've got 9 or 10 Pro Bowls, I just don't have the Super Bowl or the MVP.
Right, yeah, and that's what makes him such an interesting case. But, I mean, I've got to think, you've mentioned that there are guys that haven't won it all and are in. I mean, he's so high up there in too many categories that I don't know how you could keep him out, especially if he does play another 3 or 4 years. he solidifies that case if he gets one. If he gets one ring, there's no doubt. But without it, I still think he's in a position where I don't know how you leave him out.
Yeah, the thing I'm looking at is I don't know if I would make the call. And there's a part of me that's maybe leaning on the Hall of Fame crew not giving a nod to Phillip Rivers, because when you look at Warren Moon also, and I know people are going to probably throw this out in the comment section, he had over his career, he wasn't a huge rusher, but he had almost 2,000 yards on the ground for his career, whereas Phillip Rivers is like half of that. I wonder if that plays into it a little bit as well, with Warren Moon being a little bit more dual threat than what Phillip Rivers is. But it's just interesting to where I think Phillip Rivers will fall into that category unless he wins a Super Bowl of, hey, he doesn't have a Super Bowl, but he's been consistent the entire, since he started. It's almost like a Brett Favre situation. It's like since he took over the reins in 2006, he has started every game at quarterback for the Chargers for the last, 12 years, 13 years after, this will be the 13th year. So, I mean, there's an Iron Man thing to it. There's also just the constant, consistent success that can play into it as well. Is there any other Matt Ryan, Cam Newton, Russell Wilson? Do you think there's any cases to where it's like, you know what? I want to dive into this guy before we dive into the kind of last up-and-comer guys?
Yeah, I think maybe I throw Cam Newton in there. I don't think he's really in that category. But I think the thing with him and Wilson that's interesting that I want to talk maybe more on Wilson is he's a little more mobile, right? He does do some dedicated running. So how does that get factored in? I guess the only real comparable quarterback of old, at least that, we know in our lifetime very well, is Michael Vick. But I do think, that said, I think Russell Wilson is definitely more of a pure passer compared to what he might have been his first year or two. But I do think it's interesting when you consider the rushing statistics too and how that plays a factor.
Yeah, because I know that there's going to be people out there that obviously lived through, let's say, the early days of Steve Young, but like the Johnny Unitas, the Frank Tarkenton, the Joe Montana days, where it's like my first memories, I'm a 90s baby, so like my first memories are, I remember Troy Aikman and the Cowboys, the Steve Young later on in his career, Kurt Warner, Brett Favre, Warren Moon later on in his career, so it's like, and John Elway obviously later in his career as well, to where when it comes to Russ and it comes to Cam Newton, with Cam, let's see, how many years has he been in the league? So he's been in the league, 7 years? And I mean, being in the Super Bowl helped, but not winning it didn't help. Having an MVP season is a good thing. It's just, in 7 years you've racked up 3 Pro Bowls. The more years that Drew Brees plays, Aaron Rodgers plays, how many chances is Cam Newton going to have to be that Pro Bowl quarterback? And then Russ, yeah, he's got the Super Bowl championship. He's got 5 Pro Bowls. But the thing is he going to need also has only been playing 7 years. So there's that into it as well, where it may be a too early to call situation. But I wonder if Russell, does Russell need an MVP season to solidify himself? And I know it's way too early to probably think about that because he's only played 7 years into his career. I know it's wow, it's only been 7 years. But that's where I kind of see those two guys. Who are the guys that you put in your last group? Kind of like the ones that are they're going to be in the discussion, but right now it's just way too early to put them in a Hall of Fame discussion.
Yeah, so the first and obvious one is Pat Mahomes. Just put up crazy video game type numbers last year. Obviously, if he were to continue that, there's no doubt he's going to be in the discussion. But obviously, there's so much that plays into it. Like you said, just the duration of a guy playing that, we just need to see more of it from him. And then two others I threw in there that this is just for discussion purposes.
Mm-hmm.
I think Deshaun Watson has showed that he has talent from the get-go that, obviously, not all these guys that we're talking about were great in their careers to begin with. So if you show that promise so early in your career, I think it, starts you off on a good foot to be in that discussion. So he's in there. And then I threw in Baker Mayfield just because he kind of splashed on the scene and had a pretty good first year.
The question I want to ask you, and this has nothing to do with the individual guys, but it kind of relates closer to Patrick Mahomes. And I think you asked this before we went live. Do you kind of see is this the beginning of the next up-and-comers for Hall of Fame? And when I say that, where it's you've got maybe Tom Brady, he's like the Michael Jordan, where it's the kind of like the old man's game, where it's you've got that pro-style quarterback, he does it his way, and is very successful. Then you've got kind of I don't want to say Eli or Phillip, but Cam Newton really fits it, but I don't think he's a Hall of Fame. But then you've got the Midgard of a LeBron James, where it's he's just as good. Maybe Aaron Rodgers is in that sense, where it's he's Hall of Fame. It's more of the physical ability, doesn't have the championship success that the other one has, whereas Patrick Mahomes could be closer to that kind of, let's say, Steph Curry, what that meant for the NBA, where it's these are now the next wave of quarterbacks, where it's this group is going to, it's going to take a while for them to get into that discussion, but when they do, it's not going to be like your dad or your grandfather's quarterbacks. It's going to be the new wave of quarterbacks that we're now seeing in the NFL.
Yeah, for sure. And I think this whole discussion just, points to how different the game is. I was talking to you beforehand. There's 26 quarterbacks in the Hall of Fame in the modern day era.
Mm-hmm.
And when you think about it, we just listed, I think, what most people would consider at least probably ends up being 5 or 6 safe bets that make it in for sure.
Mm-hmm.
To have that many guys playing all at one time is pretty crazy, but it's a passing game now. So it'll be interesting just to see going forward, does the standard for what a quarterback needs to do change? It's hard to do that because, you have all these old school guys that didn't put up quite the numbers, but it was a different game. So I think that's also an interesting part of this discussion.
Yeah, and right now I'm trying to look, let's see, because the website that they have is great, but the thing that I don't like is they give you the, here's the years they played, and it's no, I want the years, that they were inducted into the Hall of Fame, and is Wikipedia going to let me do what I want to do? So I'm going to go to class here really quick. So yeah, the last quarterback, let's see, probably doing this live on a podcast is not the best idea, but we do what we've got. Yeah, the last quarterback to be inducted into the Hall of Fame, they were in back-to-back years, really. There were 3 of them. 2017 was Kurt Warner. 2016 was Brett Favre and Ken Stabler were in the Hall of Fame. Before that, we hadn't seen a quarterback inducted until Troy Aikman and Warren Moon were inducted in 2016. So it's also one of those positions with quarterback that we kind of have a high esteem for, where we just and I say we, I'm not even on the selection committee, but it's kind of like the Hall of Fame voting. I feel like they're very selective with their quarterbacks to where it's like, we don't just let anybody into this club. Like, to be, especially quarterback, to be in this club, you have to really be the best of the best. And I mean, it would be interesting to just go through, if someone like goes through a study and like how many positions are of each. Like, I look at running backs and it looks like there's more running backs in the Hall of Fame than there are quarterbacks. But it's just, I have this feeling that this selection process is like, we don't let just anybody in quarterback wise. So it's like, I take Patrick Mahomes, for example. It's great he won an MVP this year, but he's got to keep that up. He's got to win MVPs. He's got to win Super Bowls, because as we've seen with that middle group, it's either you've got the stats but no Super Bowls and you're kind of in the middle ground, or you've got the Super Bowls and your stats are not phenomenal and you can also be in the middle ground as well. Where, I mean, the funny one that you throw out is Baker, because after 1 year, how many, I'll throw it this way. If Baker wins one Super Bowl for Cleveland, is that enough to be like, you're a Hall of Famer? If he had an MVP year and one Super Bowl in Cleveland, would that be enough for you to give him Hall of Fame odds just because it's Cleveland?
I don't think so. No, I mean, I think that's significant and it builds his resume. But no, I mean, I think he'd have to have sustained success. I think that's just a requirement no matter who you are. So I don't think that would be enough, but it certainly would be something that a lot of people wouldn't be able to say, you know, I resurrected this terrible team and took them to the ship.
Well, any final thoughts, Matt, about anything when it comes to Hall of Fame quarterbacks, or anything that you think we did not hit in this segment?
No, I mean, I think it's definitely a quarterback's game, and I think we need to definitely cherish just the amount of great quarterbacks we have. I think there's not too many quarterbacks nowadays that we look at and just like, wow, they're awful. There are a few, but in general, it's just, there's a lot of high quality quarterbacks, and it's interesting to see how the game has changed in our lifetimes, and it'll be interesting to see how it continues going forward.
Well, this is where you guys come in. Let us know what you guys think down below. What do you think of what's your kind of bracket for the Hall of Fame? Who's in, who's on the fence, who's the up-and-comers, and what do you think about some of the ones we talked about? Aaron Rodgers we hit, Eli Manning we spent some time on, Phillip Rivers. What are your thoughts down below? And to close out the podcast, got another special treat for you guys as this solo edition of the Onside Kick kind of rolls on post Mark Weber, post Sean being on. Had Matt on in the last segment. Thank you again for Matt for being on the podcast. And now I bring in another patron to the Onside Kick, Pat, calling in from Illinois. And Pat, before I get into what you're going to talk about, how are you doing today?
I'm good. The heat wave is finally over. We're done with all of that bullshit 100-degree weather, and I'm finally glad to be back on the Onside Kick. Thanks for having me.
Is it over for sure, though? Because, like, when I was looking at the weather on Sunday, it was like, oh, we get a tease, and then it's going right back up into the 90s.
Well, where I am, it's basically over. Like, It's only been in the 70s. Like, if you look at the weather, it'll say, for the last week, it said like 90 degrees, but feels like 105. We're done with that crap, which I'm very thankful of. I'm just glad I can work outside and not worry about sweating my butt off anymore. So it's over for me. And
as I just pulled up these trusty iPhones we've got now, Chicago, the highest we're going to see is about an 85, 86. But you know what? Everyone listening to this is going to be like, guys, what are you talking about? Because we are recording this a week early. You guys are seeing this the week of the 31st, end of the month. We're recording this on the 23rd right now, kind of ahead of schedule. And what we're going to take a dive into is, before we dive into it, make sure if you want to be like Pat, check out patreon.com/mostvaluablepodcast in the description. Gold tier members can join the podcast and talk about whatever it is you would like to talk about. And we're going to take a look at the NFC North with Pat being a Bears guy, myself being a Vikings guy. We've talked about, I know Mark and I talked about Aaron Rodgers at length during the Packers preview. We're going to look at which quarterback in the NFC North is under the most pressure. And I'm going to put you basically right under the gun right away, Pat, because I was going to come into this saying, well, there's kind of two quarterbacks that really don't have a lot of pressure. And I was going to say Matt Stafford's probably at the bottom. Mitch Trubisky is also another one that probably doesn't have a lot of pressure. However, you are on the contrary to that. I'm going to kick it off to you. And why do you think Mitch Trubisky is under the most pressure out of these quarterbacks in the NFC North?
So right now, why I think Mitch Trubisky is has the most pressure is because where he is on a team that has as much talent as the Bears, as a coaching staff that knows how to utilize him as the Bears. It's really up to him to help elevate the Bears to where they got to, getting farther than they got last year. So last year they got to the wild card, they got to the first round, lost on that double doink, and we'll always hear about that for the rest of days. But Trubisky actually played well in that game, and he led them on a drive that should have won on the game, but didn't. But now it's up to him this year, because everyone was talking about last year about the Bears defense carried that team. Trubisky was more of like a game manager who would have, sometimes he would have great moments, sometimes he would have terrible moments. But everyone is projecting this year for the Bears defense like, okay, they're going to take a lot of steps back because they're not going to be this takeaway machine. They're not going to get to the quarterback maybe as much as they did because offenses are going to adjust to them. So a lot of that pressure is now going to fall on Trubisky to say, hey, like the defense is still going to be great, still going to be dominant, but it's not going to be as dominant as they were in 2018. We need you to step it up and play with more consistency, learn how to actually carry a team when the defense is not having its best day. And that was something that Trubisky just struggled with last year because there were so many games where he looked all right and he looked like the future is bright, but then there were a lot of games that he just did not look good and looked awful against other teams. So it's up to him to have I think he's under the most pressure because he can be really what makes or breaks this Bears team, who has a lot of what I would probably safely say Super Bowl or NFC Championship game or bust expectations this season.
Yeah, and the thing that I kind of think about is, I know that Mark and I had talked about this, I think, on the Bears preview, is the only reason, because each quarterback, I think, has their own, obviously, situation that they're dealing with. Matthew Stafford, to me, is the only one that's kind of like a situation. Like, you and I were talking before the podcast, and like you said, Matthew Stafford, like, is who he is. Like, we don't expect too much out of him. We know he's a good quarterback. He's reliable for that Lions team. Like, I don't think the expectations for him are through the roof. So there's not a lot of pressure in Detroit. It's basically everything else around him. When it comes to Kirk Cousins, after last year, throwing the money at him, we've got the defense just like the Bears had this year, and basically not making the playoffs. That's not good enough. And I know there was a lot of people, I still remember watching on Facebook his press conference after that loss to the Bears, and the fans in Minnesota just basically pulling him and dragging him underneath the bus like, this is bullshit, get him out of here, he's overpaid.
He got so much hate.
And I kind of took a step back like, okay, it is only year one. Adam Thielen did have a rock star year. Like, let's give him year two, but I'll get into Cousins a little bit later. Then there's Aaron Rodgers with the whole fiasco of kicking the coach out of town, getting a coach that many people think that is going to be the, hey, Aaron Rodgers is now the seniority in that offense and can kind of do his audibles and not have to worry about the coach saying, hey, why are you audibling out of my plays? And then there's with Mitch, I feel like his pressure is kind of split between him and Nagy, because a lot of things that I heard from Chicago Bears fans after the playoff loss wasn't very much, well, after the Cody Parkey jokes and memes were put out there, a lot of people were putting blame on Coach Nagy rather than Mitch Trubisky. And the thing I want to ask you, Pat, is do you think that lessens the pressure put on Mitch, that there were some situations in the season, in the playoff game, where it wasn't really Mitch making the mistake, it was more so on maybe a inexperienced Nagy maybe calling the wrong play and putting the offense in a not prime situation that they'd want to be in?
I sort of agree with that. I think that really came to fruition the first game of the season when the Bears had that 20-0 lead over the Packers, and Nagy in the second half, his play calling was, I think a lot of Bears fans were really frustrated that he seemed to be like too quote unquote cute, as Mark Weber would say. Mm-hmm. And he wouldn't like run the ball with Jordan Howard. He would try to throw a lot of screens that weren't working. And to be honest, I think there were still snippets of that throughout the season, but although Nagy himself has been very honest in saying that, like, hey, this is who I am as a play caller. Like, I'm going to get better because I haven't called plays a lot of my career, but I'm still going to be doing these certain things. And Nagy went 12-4 this year as a head coach. So I think he does get a lot more leeway because he did help that team offensively become more creative and get touchdowns out of areas that they really shouldn't have gotten touchdowns or wouldn't have gotten them in the past. So I think the pressure is on him to, like, because he's been talking a lot and hyping up his quarterback, saying like, oh, Mitch is in like the 300 level of his offense now he's had a chance to grasp it, now that he's had a chance to like study it for another off season, not have to adjust to another offensive system. But to me, that puts more pressure on Mitch because, like, hey, your coach is hyping you up. He's saying like you've mastered it. Your teammates are hyping you up, saying like you're a big leader on this team. You're about to have a breakout year. Vegas is putting odds on you to have an MVP season, which I think is kind of ridiculous. But that also showcases the pressure of like, hey, these guys are really talking you up. They're believing in you. Like, you need to take that step forward if this team is going to move on. So I think it's still a little bit more on Trubisky rather than Nagy.
Yeah, and that's kind of interesting. Like the part that you said where when you get the coach talking you up, when you get the players talking you up, when you get the kind of Vegas backing of like, hey, we're going to have this basically be a bet where we're not going to lose money if it happens. I think it's also with kind of Mitch of the reason why we might think that he's under a lot of pressure is, like you said, this team was not expected to be anywhere as good as they were a year ago, where I remember coming into the season, I had them, 4 wins? Then the Khalil Mack trade happens, and I'm like, okay, I'll give them 2 wins, where Mark bumped them up a little bit more, said they were a playoff team. In the preseason, I was like, well, that's you being a fan. Like, I understand playoff team, but they are a better team. No one expected the Bears to be the top of the NFC North before last season. No one expected them to be, honestly, going into that Philly game, it was really, in my mind, could this team, like, I was already overlooking the Eagles and like, okay, could this team compete with the Rams? Could they compete with the Saints, to where that is going to add a little bit of pressure, at least, to Trubisky. But to me, the quarterback, and I'm kind of flip-flop, like, I want to flip-flop here, but I don't, because there's 2 in my mind that you could say that have the most pressure, and I think I'm going to lean towards Aaron Rodgers, but there's Kirk Cousins and Aaron Rodgers, and I almost wanted to say Kirk because the coach is established, the offensive weapons are established, the defense is established. Really, the only questions are you and the health of our young running back. And there was a part of me that wanted to steer into that lane and be like, Kirk Cousins is under the most pressure because we should have the most ready team to make a push at a Super Bowl. But I think I'm going to swerve and go the other way and say Aaron Rodgers. And the reason why I am saying Aaron Rodgers is because of 2 bullet points. Number 1, depending on how you see it, Aaron Rodgers and Mike McCarthy were battling heads, and whether it was Aaron pushing him out or the ownership saying, well, one of them has to go, Mike McCarthy lost that battle, and Aaron Rodgers is still there. So really, in one way or another, Aaron Rodgers was responsible for the firing of Mike McCarthy in my mind. Number 2 is something that I know Dave brings up all the time when talking about Aaron Rodgers, is that he was the one that the Packers moved on from. Like they said, you know what, we're going to go to Aaron Rodgers away from the Hall of Famer Brett Favre after he retired and said he wanted to come back. And they were like, no, we're moving on. And Dave always says it's funny how when you look at their careers, they're kind of the same, where Aaron Rodgers is a really good quarterback, going to be a Hall of Famer when he retires, but how many Super Bowl wins does Aaron Rodgers have? The same exact Super Bowl wins as Brett Favre. And also, early on in his career with the Packers, ton of success, has kind of teetered off as of late. That's why, to me, I'm going to kind of go with the Aaron Rodgers is under the most pressure of, all right, Mike McCarthy is gone. Your team has not been, they've been good, but haven't been the greatest. I know that 2017 was bad because you weren't playing and you were injured. But to me, he's the one, because this Packer team with Aaron Rodgers should be one of the teams that people in the preseason are saying they are going to be the top of the NFC North, because they arguably have the second best quarterback in the league under center for them each and every week. What do you think about that? The Aaron Rodgers maybe having more pressure than Mitch.
See, I struggled with this a lot when evaluating Rodgers, because I was trying to take into account his injuries from 2017 and his injury that he suffered the first week of this season. Mm-hmm. And seeing how he played this season, I couldn't tell if it was a combination. I couldn't tell which factor made him struggle this season to throw only 25 touchdowns and lead his team to the record that he did. Was his injury hampering him? Was the Mike McCarthy play calling just so stale that it was asking just way too much of Rodgers at too many different times? Or was his team just full of young players that, other than Devontae Adams, just weren't utilized correctly or just didn't produce as much as they were expected to? Mm-hmm. And so for me, with bringing in Matt LaFleur and getting rid of McCarthy, I feel that the pressure is more on LaFleur rather than Rodgers, because we know who Rodgers is as a quarterback. We know he can make throws that really no quarterback can make in this league, other than like possibly a couple. So to me, the pressure is more on his head coach to help Rodgers in a system that shows like, hey, I don't need you to be this Superman on every single play like McCarthy was telling you to do. You don't have to make impossible throws to help this team. You can make all those throws, but you can make some more that can help us get down the field and get key conversions and key yards picking up to help us. So to me, Rodgers, I know who he is as a quarterback. I know he's going to go down as one of the best to play this game. We know what kind of player he is. But can his head coach help him utilize him in a system that doesn't ask so much of him, so much of the time, and utilize the players around him like Aaron Jones, who is running back who people argued wasn't as used last season, and to not have to rely on Devontae Adams, but develop the wide receivers around him much better. And also, I would also say that his defense is probably going to play a big role in that, because it's been pointed out so many times, like the reason Rodgers has always struggled in the postseason is if his defense allows 20 or more less points, Rodgers has never lost a postseason game. Mm-hmm. But if they give up 20 or more, the record is completely lopsided. So to me, it's more on the overall team and the coach and not as much on Aaron Rodgers.
Yeah, and I think the thing that also plays into, because the reason why I almost said Kirk was exactly what you were talking about with LaFleur. We're being, all right, there's going to be pressure on Matt LaFleur because this is his first time being that head coach. And of course, when you've got to deal with an ego, I'm just going to say an ego like Aaron Rodgers, that's not easy when it's your first head coaching job.
He's got a tough one for him.
And I think the other thing I kind of look at is I look at the other quarterbacks that are at the top of the league along with Aaron Rodgers. Tom Brady, who's number one, the GOAT. He is always in the playoffs. Patriots are always a team that's like AFC Championship, Super Bowl. They're going to be in one of the two. Drew Brees, how successful that Saints team has been in recent, and I'm talking like consistent success. Phillip Rivers and that Chargers of late. You've got the Seahawks with Russell Wilson. They lose the Legion of Boom. Seahawks are still a playoff team with Russell Wilson. I know there's a little like underlying seeds there because Aaron Rodgers and Russell Wilson don't like each other. Or I should say, from what the media members say, Aaron Rodgers doesn't like Russell, is what they say. And then like Big Ben, how the Steelers have been successful. Matt Ryan, how they have been successful. Where it's like these other quarterbacks that you are clearly better than, because most people have Brady at 1 and Rodgers at 2. Why are they all their teams are having success and not you? And I know that brings in the much bigger discussion of, well, in football, it's not like one player. In basketball, you could have the best player and still make the playoffs. Well, in football, if I'm the quarterback, I'm not on the field to play defense. So that plays into it as well of it does take more of a team, but offensively, you should be able to pull a team to the playoffs. But like you mentioned, when the defense is bad as it is it kind of a back and forth? That's why I'll ask you, are we both off the mark? Should it be Kirk Cousins who has the most pressure because of what I said? Mike Zimmer, established coach with Minnesota for a couple years now. He's got weapons like Kyle Rudolph, Adam Thielen, Stephon Diggs, where Stephon Diggs and Adam Thielen were phenomenal last year for him. And Kyle Rudolph, they just signed him to a contract extension. He does have a defense behind him that is a solid defense and doesn't allow the game to get out of hand to where it's like, well, if they would have given up less points, we would have won. Are we both wrong, Pat? Is it Kirk Cousins who's under the most pressure?
I think you can make a pretty compelling argument that given, like, as a Vikings fan, the huge contract he was given after Case Keenum was gone and left after leading you guys to the NFC Championship game. And because you don't pay someone 3 years, $80 million guaranteed to not make the playoffs, which is what he did his first season. The only little bit of the slack I give on Cousins a little bit, even though statistically he had a good season, but didn't beat teams with winning records as much as he should have, and just didn't play consistently well throughout the season, is I didn't know how much of that was his fault, the shoddy offensive line, or the offensive coordinator, John DeFilippo, just maybe not doing a good job of calling plays for that offense and maybe not utilizing Dalvin Cook as much as he should have used during that season, which I did think after Kevin Stefanski took over, I did think the play calling improved, but Cousins just, especially in that last game of the season against the Bears, just didn't execute. And we still have that image of him and Thielen arguing on the sidelines, which I'm sure that image alone leaves a lot of people like, yeah, he's under the most pressure, because the last image we have of him is him arguing with what you could argue is his most productive receiver about routes, and them like having a little meltdown on the sidelines, and then they lose that game and they don't make the playoffs. So for me, I think it could be wrong, because Cousins is probably he's kind of achieved that kind of level of, he's the quarterback that gets paid a lot of money, puts up nice numbers, but can't win big games and can't lead his team far in the playoffs. So that alone, you can argue that he is under the most pressure to kind of shed that label of that he's this overpaid quarterback who puts up statistically nice numbers, but when it comes down to it, can't lead his team in games and can't lead his team far in the playoffs. So you could definitely argue that him as a quarterback is under the most pressure just to shed that label of being an overpaid player who doesn't deserve all that money given where he led his team last season.
Well, and that's the thing where I'm going to sound like a Kirk Cousins apologist, because there's a big part of me that's like, hey, it was year one. How many things in life do you expect to be great right away, but then they're not? The expectations were through the roof because the Vikings with Case Keenum were 13-3. We had the Minnesota Miracle, which shot up expectations even more. And a lot of us thought that, hey, you know what? If we would have played a better game against the Eagles, there's a possibility we should have been in the Super Bowl against the Patriots. And I kind of feel like all that put Kirk up to expectations he was not going to fulfill in year one, because yes, they had the gel together, the receivers with him, but also Kirk Cousins plays the most prime position in football. And there's a part of me that at this point after year one, yes, he did get overpaid, but what did you expect the Vikings to do? Say, hey, Kirk Cousins is never won anything. He hasn't beaten a playoff team. You know what? We're not going to sign him. We're going to go somewhere else. It's like, no, the Vikings were almost forced into that move because they needed a big name to be their quarterback, and he was the one that was there. And I feel like in year 2, this is where we gauge the Kirk Cousins train, where at each of the other quarterbacks that you and I have mentioned, Mitch has had it to where he's been in the league 2 years, and usually that third year is where you want to see that big jump from your quarterback, especially with the year that they saw last year, kind of putting some gasoline under that fire. Then you got Aaron Rodgers. He's been in the league since what? I'm going to look at his stats really quick. He started 2008, so drafted in 05, didn't play until 08 was the starter for that Green Bay team. He's been established with Green Bay for a while, to where with Minnesota, Kirk Cousins, I feel like it's this year. If this year is bad, then it's like, okay, he's got the most pressure coming into 2020 if the Vikings don't make the playoffs. But that's where I kind of sit with it. And I know that that's going to come off as, well, Ricky, you're kind of a Kirk Cousins apologist because it wasn't a great year and this Vikings team should have made the playoffs. And I agree. A bad tie against Green Bay and then a bad game against the Bears to end the season, win either of those games, and we are in the playoffs in 2018, I should say, 2018-2019 season. Do you think, Pat, I will ask you, being the non-Viking fan in the room, is it kind of sounding like I'm a Kirk Cousins apologist and why I didn't veer into that lane and went with Aaron Rodgers?
Very slightly apologist, because I think when people look at when people look at Kirk Cousins, you know, they see a veteran quarterback and they immediately expect of like there's going to be some growing pains. But as a veteran quarterback who has gone through coordinators in Washington and head coaches and has been able to adjust to those systems, I think it's not out of realm to expect him to come into Minnesota, and it might take a little bit of the season. But I remember we talked about last year that if you were going to be concerned if you're 10 games in and he's still not grasping this offense, like I'm pushing the panic button. And I think that's not unreasonable to expect out of a veteran quarterback. I think Trubisky gets a lot of slack for that because he is a rookie quarterback who only started 1 year. He was not a rookie, but a second-year quarterback who only started 1 full year in college. And something to slightly go off, something I found on Trubisky, which I think explains a lot of why he's been struggling to kind of get basic things on the football field done or make simple throws or make simple things that people assume that he would be able to do, was they looked up his passing attempt numbers in college. They compared them with Patrick Mahomes and Deshaun Watson. And Mahomes had 1,300 passing attempts in his career. Watson had about 1,200. Trubisky only had 572. So that's almost triple and double the amount of lefty attempts that Mahomes and Watson did. So you can see that he just did not have the type of reps that you'd expect a college quarterback to come out, because he was a very unique situation. But Kirk Cousins, he's been in the league for so many years that you'd expect him to come in and be able to kind of grasp that offense a lot quicker than he actually did. And they did have O-line issues, and Kirk Cousins, as pointed out, is not a guy who can scramble out of the pocket and make throws easily, kind of like Case Keenum did. But you'd expected him to more adjust to it, I think, than he possibly did. So slight apologist on that part, but I think every fan is an apologist for their quarterback if they're struggling.
Now,
I definitely am as a Trubisky fan.
The last thing I will ask you is the guy that neither of us said, where we didn't even, I brought him up at the beginning, and I just want to, give him his fair due, because Lions fans, you guys are a part of this division, although we make fun of your team endlessly for 0-16 and never being really relevant in the division. But Matthew Stafford, should there be I don't want to say pressure, because yes, there should be pressure on everybody to win in the NFL, but should there be a substantial amount of pressure on Matthew Stafford based on just because of what the Lions have been, especially under, Matt Patricia only 1 year, 6-10. Is that another reason why we're kind of like, you know what? You don't have any pressure because, it doesn't matter that you haven't made the playoffs till 2016. It doesn't matter that in the Jim Caldwell era since 2014, you only made the playoffs twice and lost in the wild card round. Is it because we're still waiting for Patricia to build this team that we're kind of like, Matthew Stafford, you get a pass. We're not going to put any pressure on you because we just don't expect anything out of the Lions year in and year out?
I think that, especially after last year, you're kind of looking at Stafford just as himself and go like, well, what else can he really show us? Like, what has he done to show that he kind of deserves that pressure? Like, he has a new head coach, but Patricia's a defensive-minded head coach. And last year was probably one of his worst statistical seasons that he's had. So at this point, you're kind of like, well, what do we expect from Matthew Stafford? I'm like, he kind of is who he is at this point. He's 31 years old. He's gotten better in some aspects, but hasn't improved on other aspects since being the number one pick out of Georgia. So at this point, you're kind of just like, well, you can game plan for him, and if he can execute it, it'll be great. But what else should we really expect out of Stafford at this point? To me, he's kind of like the Jay Cutler-esque right now. Like, you can game plan for him, but you can't. The expectation that he's going to get better or he should be able to carry this team again, that's kind of out the window at this point. I just don't have any really faith in Matthew Stafford to improve or surprise anybody. Maybe the Lions team as a whole can surprise because they did get a lot better this offseason. But what should we reasonably expect out of Matthew Stafford at this point? Because to me, it's not much. That's why he's number 4. That's why I wrote LOL Stafford at the bottom of my list.
Well, with me, when it comes to Stafford, it's almost like in the past few years, it's like, well, what do you want him to do? Or you look at last year and it's like, yes, the yards were down. Yes, the touchdowns were down, but his interceptions were around the same, 10 to 11. His touchdown to interceptions went up, but that's because he had 7 less touchdowns than he had the year before. And I look at it. Hasn't had a reliable tight end, especially didn't last year. That's why they went out and got TJ Hockenson in the draft. You look at the wide receivers, and it's like when they traded Golden Tate, that was almost like, well, Stafford, you got Kenny Galladay, and I know that Detroit fans are going to tell me Kenny Galladay is good. Yes, he's good, but he's not, to me, he's not yet what you wanted from that number 1 wide receiver. Hopefully he gets better this year. You've got Marvin Jones at number 2. Danny Amendola, are we expecting anything? Well, is he going to stay healthy? That's the first thing. Are we going to expect anything from that? The running back situation, Kerryon Johnson being so young, I feel like this team is a mix of, especially offensively, young or molding into their position, which I know we don't get this in the NFL, Pat, but I kind of have a feeling that I wouldn't be surprised if in 2 seasons, so after the 2020 season, not that Detroit takes the potential out that they have in Stafford's contract, but if we start seeing, okay, Stafford's going into being 33 years old for the 2021 season, who's going to trade for him? And who is the Lions going to try to dump Stafford on? Because I feel like this team, the timeline of the team and the timeline of Matthew Stafford are off. And that's the main thing with Matthew Stafford, where it's like, we're not going to have, I don't put pressure on him because that is the MO that I'm kind of at right now, is that, he's an older quarterback and this team is younger. Sooner or later, it's going to be like, well, we're not anywhere, in 2 years, we're not anywhere to be competing. Let's trade him, try to get draft capital for him so that we can get younger, better players through the draft. Am I crazy for throwing out that take?
No, you're not crazy because Stafford is who he is at this point. He's a guy who can put up decent numbers, but in the same kind of vein as Cousins, can't, at the very end of games, they can't come through when it means the most. Mm-hmm. And I know Detroit fans will go on about like, well, he's had a lot of offensive coordinators. He's had a few head coaches. He hasn't had the best weapons. I'm like, well, at this point, like, what are you supposed to do with the weapons around Stafford and bank on that running game? You know, Calvin Johnson's gone. Golden Tate is gone. You don't really have that many weapons around him at this point. And like, what else can you really expect from Matthew Stafford? Like, he's done what he's done so far, which has been respectable, but like, how much more can you hype up a guy who's kind of like, which I feel like kind of like he's teetering off a little bit, you know, like where he's just who he is. He's not going to, I really don't see him getting that much better at this point. And you can argue that like, oh, his new Darryl Bevell is going to come in and help out that offense. Like, how many times have we heard this story with other quarterbacks? So like, he's got a new offensive coordinator. It's going to be great. And then it just goes like, it just happens how it usually did. So at this point, I really don't expect much out of Matthew Stafford. They could surprise them as a team as a whole, but I wouldn't bank a lot of that on Matthew Stafford at this point. So sorry, Lions fans, but I'm not sorry, because I'm glad that your team sucks now.
Yeah, and I mean, for me, it's just I really do wonder what it's going to be like in the future with Stafford, with where this team is at now, and then basically his contract, because he's, 31 now. By the end of his contract, if he goes all the way through, it'll be, 34, 35? They have that potential out between 32 and 33. It'll just be interesting to be if they say, hey, we're going to stick with the older quarterback, or if, hey, this team is younger, we're going to go younger too and move away from the older quarterback. And then what teams at the time will even want to trade for Stafford? What would the price be? Those are conversations for another time, but
I could see Tennessee doing that, unless they got really sick of Marcus Mariota.
Especially if Mariota kind of I don't want to say falls off, because he's my horse in the race when it comes to him and Jameis. I will always root for Mariota because I want to be right and not wrong when Mark backed
Mariota's
Winston.
Just a better person than Jameis, so it's easy to root for Mariota.
It's easy to root for Mariota, but I'll be honest, I can't stand Jameis ever since the college days. But any final thoughts from you before we put a nice bow on this segment in this podcast?
This has been great. It's been fun talking NFC North. I think this season's going to be fun. It's going to be really interesting. I think the division itself, whether you're a Vikings or Bears or Packers or Lions fan, has a lot of interesting storylines for each team. And this season's going to be fun. I think it's going to be a fun time for everybody.
Yeah, I just hope there's not and of course, knock on wood, as this table isn't really wood. But I just hope there's not a huge injury where it's great, the story would have been different. I want although I want the Vikings to win the Super Bowl every year, I want a 3-dog race where it's you know what? It's these 3 teams battling, and I would love to go back to what I thought it would be, a year ago, 2 years ago, when I was we're going to have 3 teams from this division in the playoffs. I think that would be special. Have the Vikings at 3 or 4, maybe 1 or 2. Bears and Packers can have the wild card games, because I'm gracious, Pat. I'll give the Bears and the Packers the wild card games or the wild card spots. But I would love to have that for this year. Plus, I think all over the NFL, there's just going to be interesting storylines. The last thing I'll ask you before we wrap up, if you had to put your money on the craziest thing we're going to see from the Raiders' Hard Knocks, what do you think it's going to be?
Brown and Gruden punching each other.
Oh, God, I would... Just them getting into an argument.
Television. See, I kind of wish that the Packers were on Hard Knocks so I can just see the conversations between LaFleur and Rodgers, because I will stand by this comment for the rest of my life. Aaron Rodgers is more of a dick than Jay Cutler ever was. Jay Cutler was
I could see it.
I don't care about much kind of guy and had a very dry sense of humor, but Aaron Rodgers is just a dick. And he's just a complete, total dick to everybody, especially this reports that came out. And I will always stand by that. Cutler will never be as great of a quarterback as Rodgers, and they'll both remember for different things, but I will stand by that Cutler is probably a nicer person you want to talk to than Aaron Rodgers.
Especially after seeing Cutler on his wife's reality show.
He is the MVP of
he
that
is
show.
amazing. Like, he's the only reason why I know that show exists. I'll be honest.
He has made reporters in Chicago type out that they will say, I have done, as a 40-year-old man who covers sports for a living, I have done something on a Sunday night that I never thought I would do. Sit down, turn on the E! Network on purpose, watch reality TV.
My favorite is still when she's like, no, but you're not doing anything. You're retired, but you're not doing anything. And he's like, so? Like, I'm sitting there going, exactly, that's the life I want to live. I want to be able to say I did all this, and you know what? I can finally retire and live my life. Why do I have to go out and do something if I don't want to do something?
To his wife's business and talks to her employees, lady, who do you think built this empire? Yeah, you're looking at him like, that's my quarterback. That's my quarterback.
Oh man! But Pat, thank you again for being on the Onside Kick. It's always a treat having you on the podcast, whether it's the Onside Kick, whether it is the Fast Break Primetime Podcast, and you could be just like Pat too. If you go down below, click that link, patreon.com/mostvaluable-podcast. Gold tier members, they get to join the podcast each and every month, any MVP podcast that they choose, and talk about the topics you would like to talk about. Also want to pimp out the Twitter at Most Valuable Pod. I'm at Ricky Widmer. Also, make sure to rate and review the Onside Kick on Apple Podcasts and iTunes. Help us get into the ears of more people. Want to thank you guys for watching the solo edition. Next week, I'm going to try to get Sean on. For our annual prediction podcast, where we kind of hold it to us, what each division's going to look like, who's going to be the playoff, and then next week, everyone's going to find out who gets the kiss of death this year. The Jacksonville Jaguars, last year's victim. We'll find out who gets it this year. Make sure to subscribe to Most Valuable Podcast, but as always, have a good day, everybody.